Hi, I'm Porter Anderson again, back with you again for a second session in our continuing look at independent publishing this afternoon from Frankfurter Buchmesse. We're glad to have you with us here in Frankfurt studio. All new setup here for us with which we can originate programming to the folks who can't be with us in this in-person festival this year. We're having a great week. It's going very well. Many people are here, and three of the best are with me now. We're going to be talking about one of the most difficult issues that affects all of publishing. It's not just independent publishing. It's a great challenge. It's an exciting challenge because it's taking us in a good direction, but it's taking us there with a lot of thought and a lot of challenge to it. It's not an easy one. This is diversity we're talking about. And what does diversity mean in terms of where we are going in publishing, how we're handling this, how we're thinking about it. And we have three great people to talk with us here. From Paris, we have Pierre Astier of Astier Pécher. We also have Juliette Ponce from Paris, and she is, of course, the publisher at Dalva Edition, very exciting house. And we have with us Ravi Marshandani. You may know him from London, Picador, UK. It's great to have you all with us. Pierre, could we start with you? What do you think is the impact of the diversity issue on how we're starting to look at what we're doing in publishing? Our overarching title of this session is, what do we want to be, and are we getting there? Who are we, right?
That's a big question.
It is.
But it's very interesting, in fact. Well, I've been an agent for now 15 years.
Ah.
And I started representing a few authors from the French-speaking world. So I discovered the large diversity of the French authors from not only Europe but also from Africa, from Caribbean islands, Indian Ocean.
It's a huge francophone
In
world.
fact, it's huge.
Yeah.
And that was very impressive just to discover all those voices. We started also to represent authors from, let's say, the rest of the world, except English-speaking authors.
Right.
So we discovered those authors from Eastern Europe, from Scandinavia, from Baltic states, Asia. We opened an office in Asia. We opened an office in Africa. So
Very nice.
we decided to have a global view of what was being written in the world, but it can be pretentious to say that. But my idea was just to discover new voices in all different languages. And at the same time, I must say that we discovered all those languages that are spoken in the world that are not the dominant languages, because in fact there are around 7,000 languages spoken, written in the world,
Right.
but only 10, 12 are those dominant languages that we find in the book markets in the world. So it's interesting just to think about what is going to happen to all those languages. There are sometimes small press that are appearing here and there, and starting to publish in very I mean, when we say small, they can be spoken by sometimes millions of people.
Right.
It's spoken and written by people, and they can be very creative, you know. So I think that the future of our job is just to be very careful and watch at what is going to happen with those languages, because also it's an heritage, and we have to preserve those languages. So we have to work with authors, publishers all over the world that work not only with the dominant languages, but also with those other languages in Africa, in Asia, South America.
This is so interesting what you're saying. I know a composer named Paolo Prestini who works in operetta, and she's actually going into the little Italian languages that are way out in the south of Italy and are slowly disappearing because there are so few people speaking them. Some of them are dialects of others, and some of them are quite unique, and they're vanishing in time.
Yeah.
And she's trying to create music based on their sounds as well as in what they say and how they say it, so that it can be preserved, so that something's left of it. I think it's very important. One of your colleagues, Nermin, in Kalem Agency in Istanbul, will be very angry I said this. She hates it, but we call them the small languages because, of course, Turkish is not spoken by as many people as English or Spanish or something. And I understand that some don't like the phrase small, but we know what we mean when we say it, a language that has a limited number of people who are conversant and fluent in it. And I think it's fascinating what you're doing in that regard.
Trying. Trying.
Do you find very many other agents doing this? Is it an interest that's broader,
Well,
or
I think that
just growing?
Nermin is,
Well, she is
in a way,
certainly, yes,
because
yes.
I mean, there
She's
are,
one to talk, right?
yeah, of course. I mean, authors from Central Asia, for example, Uzbekistan, or well, that's very interesting. I mean, I think that's the future of the world.
It is. Well, it's. I know that some of our neighbors to the south in the United States and Mexico have discovered in audiobooks that they can't just go into Spanish with an audiobook. They have to go into several different dialects. And in the Mexican culture itself, there are very, very small languages too, very specialized community tongues that are being spoken. And they're trying to develop enough of a head of steam to get some audio work done in each of them and collect that, because that needs to be preserved as well. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a huge field.
But we also need translators. That can be a problem because there are not so many. I can take an example. We represent an author from Macedonia, writes in Macedonian. And one day there was a publisher in Ethiopia interested in translating from Macedonian to Amharic, which is the language in Ethiopia. That was very complicated.
I'll bet.
And we decided to let him translate from English. But that's really fascinating and interesting, just to work together in the small world that we live in.
Fortunately, I think our translation community is growing very quickly and is becoming very intrigued by exactly the challenge you're talking about. Because to a purist, of course, it's not the same thing to go through another language to get to another.
Absolutely.
And that's an interesting case too. Ravi, you have a little different take on what we mean when we talk diversity, which is one of the things I love about this topic. The diversity of diversity will drive you crazy when you start thinking about it, you know? It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I any panel that involves one British person and two French people, I'm outnumbered here. History suggests has the potential to lead to possible misunderstanding, if not conflict. So,
we'll watch for this.
But even if those things are avoided, which I'm sure and I hope and trust that they will be.
I'm sure they will.
I still find it very interesting listening to Pierre talking with an entirely valid and very kind of interesting take on one potential meaning of that word, but it is so different from the way the word is used constantly these days in the context of British publishing and in British society more generally, that it seems to me very typically French, and that it often precedes abuse or insult, if said in English, about a French person. I don't mean it like that at all. It's just one of those moments of observing the enormous cultural gulf that has historically been across the English Channel or La Manche and continues to this day.
Indeed.
I mean, Pierre's response is his own. He's not speaking for France, but it's kind of, there's a tradition of kind of, and you mentioned this when we were emailing earlier, of sort of French universalism and so on.
Right.
And that Pierre's response to, or his interpretation of one of the meanings of the word diversity is a global one, to think of smaller languages, to use your terminology, and languages that are not the top 12, and so on and so forth. That is not the most significant meaning, or the most commonly used meaning of the word in a British cultural context at the moment, which in a very Anglo-Saxon way, in a very British way, is both somewhat insular. We are literally and metaphorically insular in Great Britain, but also looks much, much more to the United States than it does to the world as a whole. And so diversity has come to very much refer not to, as it were, the minority languages or minority communities or societies of the world, but minorities within our society.
Right.
So, if a British publisher, including me, refers to sort of trying to increase the diversity of the list, it's not publishing translations from Macedonian or Albanian or from Marathi or whatever. It's kind of across the world. It's about publishing more authors that come from the ethnic minorities that live in the UK.
Right.
Historically, of course, many of whom are there in the wonderful sort of phrase of protest, "We're here because you were there." And my father ended up in the UK because the British had been in India before.
Exactly.
So he is an example of the appropriateness of that phrase. And diversity in the context of discussion in the culture wars, in as they are often referred to, tends to focus very, very much on the representation of black writers.
Right.
And sort of within what we refer to as BAME in British society now. This is a new acronym standing for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnicities, and then the LGBTQ acronym that is more sort of internationally
And it seems
familiar.
to keep growing as more distinct.
So diversity has focused down on kind of ethnic diversity within Western societies,
Quite right.
rather than across the world,
Yep.
and a variety of minorities that have kind of both sexuality and gender.
Right.
Sometimes one, sometimes the other, but that are lumped together in this rather diverse acronym that has all
Exactly.
these letters in it.
Exactly, yeah.
As some people need to have pointed out to them, being trans has got nothing to do with being gay, for
Right,
example.
exactly,
It's kind of-
exactly.
and there's some people for whom that is still not entirely clear. It's kind of
It's creating strange bedfellows at times.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
tensions within, and
Tensions within.
kind of,
Absolutely.
some of the quite aggressive debates between different generations of feminists, which are not only true in the UK with widely reported comments by J.K. Rowling
Right.
on trans rights and trans issues. I, in many ways, feel very positive about an awful lot of this. I think that there's an immense contribution to be made by the variety of ethnic minorities in the UK to our culture generally.
Right.
As often has happened, I think, in the Western world generally, certainly in the Anglo-American world, that greatest contribution so far has been kind of tended to be in popular music and in sport. Kind of literature is, a slower process. It's
Right,
kind
indeed.
of-
Yeah.
Partly, I suppose, because simply kind of languages both, can divide, and it's
Yes.
it's
Yes.
very. It's not often that you get somebody who's a first-generation immigrant who ends up being a great writer in a language that they've started to learn as an adult. It tends to be their children who then
That's right.
bring a certain hybridity and a freshness to the language. And there are so many examples, and not all of them are a matter of ethnic minorities. I mean, one of the greatest contributors to the literature of the UK is Joseph Conrad, for whom English was a third language after possibly fourth after Polish, Russian, French, what I find personally very frustrating about this, I am both gay and the child of an Indian father, so
Right.
I am both BAME and LGBTQ.
Wow.
Leaving not very much of the alphabet left for me to collect, is that I think it's politically I understand why the issues are what they are,
Right.
but I think it's a very narrow view of diversity in terms of culture.
Me too.
And
Me
so,
too.
I mean, I'm not the first or last person to say this, but culture has always diversity has always been a strength in culture, and hybridity has been a strength of culture. And people coming in from the outside and bringing things both to the language and to the ideas and the meanings of that, the ideas the language expresses and so on and so forth, is much, much broader than a particular, two particular minorities.
It really is.
Kind of, and the history of British publishing owes an absolutely vast amount to more than one generation of Central European Jews, whether they be German or from further east,
Right.
who came and transformed British publishing, and many of the companies, the imprints that still exist today bear their names. It's kind of Weidenfeld and Deutsch and
Exactly.
so on. And in an earlier generation, in British publishing, is the impact of Scottish immigrants to down south across the border.
Yeah.
Well, I work for a company called Macmillan. I mean, it's kind
There you
of and the Scots and the Jews basically made British publishing. It's kind of so the mainstream of the English population is a number of times larger than the Scottish population.
Right.
But culturally, in terms of our particular business, the Scottish now. It's not sort of conventional to refer to a Scotsman or Scotswoman who moves from Edinburgh to London as an immigrant, but in some ways they are. It's kind of so. I have every reason to care enormously about race. I've experienced a fair amount of racism in my life, both in Britain and elsewhere. But in terms of the business in which I work, I think focusing entirely on race and on particular aspects of sexuality is very limiting, and it means that we look at all the stuff as though it's entirely new, and it's not entirely new. It goes back to the entire history of culture.
Right.
You look at the strange hybrid dialect of Greek that the Iliad and the Odyssey are written at.
Exactly.
That is, it's predominantly Ionic Greek, not from mainland Greece, but from what is now Turkey, and it draws vocabulary from at least 2 or 3 other dialects, which are also not Attic Greek or the Greek of Sparta.
Yeah.
That's as old as we can get, virtually. It's kind of.
I think this is a great overview of the problem of the fact that when we say diversity, we're actually saying so many different things.
Yeah.
And I loved when one of the great points you've just made is that we often don't know we're saying different things. We're not thinking very clearly about this kind of distinction and about what the possibilities are when we start saying this.
And
Julia.
it shouldn't be an either or. I
No,
mean,
it shouldn't
both
be.
and is the angle that Pierre was looking at the word, and it doesn't have to be a choice. The culture will be richer if both those things.
I was going to use the word rich because all the way through history, as you're saying, this is how culture is enriched, is through its diversity, and we forget that so easily. Julia, bring us the universality.
Friends.
Sorry, I dropped you in there.
Started with Pierre. We're
Quoting
going
a
into
private
that. We're bringing
email.
out the universality next.
No, I think I totally agree with Ravi. I had the chance to live for a while in the UK and then come back to France, and it was very interesting across the channel. and I was very, well, of course, I know my own culture and this stance of universality, and every person will bloom under that perfect sky of universality, but which I do believe in many respects. My problem is we are universal for 50% of the population, and not for 48% of the population, and the 52% of women are not don't have the same space and voice, are not heard in the same way in this universal chamber.
It's like they're not in the same universe, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just that. So it's funny. It was funny to see because I left France around the Me Too era, start of the post-Me Too era.
Right.
I was in Britain and I saw what was done, and then I came back to France, and it was striking to see that the problem had been addressed in a very French way,
Right.
in the sense that. It was very political, as Ravi said. I mean, it was completely political, very controversial. A lot of, to my great pleasure, a lot of very strong feminist political texts were available in bookstores, and 10 years before they were probably hiding on a shelf somewhere in the bookstores. So that is good.
Right.
Women with very strong personal histories and things to say and to denounce and to, things to say about patriarchy in general were published.
Right.
But in general, women were underpublished, and they didn't really have a voice in a more general landscape of literature, for example. They are still underpublished, they are still ignored by major prizes, who give like very few prizes to women. They are less reviewed, except if, as I say, they have a timely memoir or a timely book about the elephant in the room, which is
Right.
abuse, you know.
Right.
And I find it, I mean, I think there's a space that is not yet occupied and not yet explored, which is, let's just bring women creativity on the stage. Let's explore what women have to say and not put them again in another box, which is
the thing.
stereotype. Oh, a woman, yeah, let's publish a woman because she has a strong political feminist view, or because she can contribute to this like necessary discussion about patriarchy. I think there's like very creative women that have a lot to say and that are a bit put aside at the moment because there's too much of that. There's no space. So I
Right.
thought we'll build up a list where we have a strong political principle, which is we publish only women, which is in France very uncommon because affirmative action is not a French thing at all. But then this said, then we publish a variety and a diversity of voices that are not especially linked to any political issue around women's rights. It can be, but it's not necessary. And I think it broadened the spectrum, and it's good.
And it must be very freeing, because I think what you're saying, that we see a lot of in the States too, is that if you're a woman writer, you publish, and no matter what it's about, it's seen as a woman's book. And it's going to be a woman's take on whatever's going on. And that expectation, that assumption, is almost impossible to get free of, right?
I know. I mean, when I was thinking about your question, why do I want to be? I want to be in a world where I don't need a Dalva edition to have such a strong principle that I publish only women.
Not that we want to put you out of business.
Yeah,
but-
no,
yeah.
it's not. But it's. I mean, I would be glad if what I'm building would be unnecessary.
Yeah.
But it is still very necessary, I feel.
It is. It is. Do you find that when you publish something, however, that it's immediately said, "Oh well, that's from Dalva, so you know that's a woman's book, and it's about." I mean, is it,
I
is it
don't know. I
almost
mean,
a
we're
self-fulfilling?
very new. We've just started.
Good.
But
And I'm sure that won't be a problem. Ignore me completely.
I think there was a strong interest when we launched the publishing house a few months ago, and the reaction were like very enthusiastic from booksellers, from readers. And it was funny because women writers wrote to say it feels like to them like a safe place to be, and
Right.
maybe to be a non-judgmental place, you know. Sometimes they feel they're coming with a book and they're trying hard to find a reader in other publishing house, and they were all mentioning in their letter, "Oh, I'm so glad a place like yours exists. I feel I can trust. I feel, even though maybe you won't publish me, but I feel grateful that this space exists." So it was very rewarding, this.
Right.
And I think also people, because I feel we have a kind of very subtle and very non-aggressive attitude towards. I mean, in France, as you know, we're very political, and people get very angry. The arguments can be very tough, and the idea was like, "Oh, come on, whether you're male or female, please read the women writers we have to offer." And this kind of very peaceful way of foreseeing the future has been, I think, great. That the booksellers are like, "Oh, we need things like this, like away from the very tough and and angry argument. So let's see if it takes on. I hope.
I think you should take this as a compliment. I think you should-
Yeah.
This means you're in the right direction.
Yeah.
And we have a very few seconds left here, but I'm going to do something real fast. I want each of you to give me like 10 seconds of what you think needs to happen most right now for diversity, for who we want to be in the future. And I'll start. I want to see more publishing houses look, in terms of their staff, like the people who are reading them. I want to see them match their cultures. So that's mine. Pierre, what do you want?
No, I would love the. I mean, Frankfurt is a place where small countries have been invited, small languages too.
Indeed.
So that's the place and where things could develop in the sense of what I said. So
Right.
I encourage the people here, the organizers of this fair,
Yep.
just to continue, try to open the fair to other cultures and other.
I like your idea. Maybe make a special interest on
Yeah.
this. Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Absolutely.
I love it. Very good. Ravi, what do you want to see?
I think my hope is something rather more practical. There's less obvious ways to enact it, but the more we can think in terms of the both and rather than the either or. And I think one of the things about sort of kind of giving voice to minority voices, whether on a planetary level or within individual societies, is it only goes so far if you then, there are strict expectations about what it is that people are allowed to say,
Right.
or not so much they're allowed to say, but what they're encouraged to say.
Exactly.
It's kind of, not every book about Japan needs to have cherry blossom on the cover,
Right.
and not every book about France published in the UK needs to have the Eiffel Tower on the cover. In fact, I would like to ban putting the
Although
Eiffel
we like
Tower
the
on
Eiffel
the cover
Tower
of
very
it, unless the book is about Monsieur Eiffel. It's kind of so. It's
I get your point. I think it's good. I think
that's more of a hope than a plan. But
Exactly.
it's
Yeah,
an
we are
aspiration.
speaking ambitiously here. Juliet,
Yeah.
tell us yours.
I think I'm going to copy Ravi a bit, but I hope we are going to go towards a less stereotyped view of diversity.
Yeah.
I think we're at that stage where a lot of things have happened in the past 20 years, I would say, especially, but we still need to go a bit further so that all these things look normal and we don't always try to stereotype writers, stereotype publishers, or readership as well. You know,
Right.
how many times do you hear this book is for this kind of person? I mean, we're not dealing with
Or
a
even more,
yogurt.
not
you know?
for this kind of
yeah,
person.
yeah.
Yeah,
We
to get
were
over it.
dealing
I don't like the
with-
first, but the
yeah,
negative
yeah,
is even
yeah,
worse.
We
yeah.
need to get over our own question a little bit.
Exactly.
Exactly. I love that. Thank you all. This has been
Thank
such a
you.
great conversation. And we're running right into the next panel's time, so I'm going to be very quick, saying it's Porter Anderson. We're coming back in just a few seconds with one more panel on independent publishing, and this one's going to be a big one. It's looking at the markets of the future. Join us. We'll be right back.